In the following slideshow and video presentation, I would like to share insights gathered from attending a booth sponsored by a dedicated group of individuals dedicated to promoting equity and common ground locally and nationally. This booth was part of the local Juneteenth event. Prior to the call for the No Kings national protest, I decided to participate in the booth. My aim was to join individuals celebrating their music, culture, and history in an environment that acknowledges national imperfections and past tolerances of inequality. Earlier this month, I visited Charlotte, South Carolina, and explored Charlestown, the first successful English settlement. The historical site provided a comprehensive account of its interactions with Indigenous Americans, indentured servants, women, slaves, and those in positions of wealth and power. Initially, the necessity for food and shelter required collaboration among all groups. They exchanged ideas and worked together, allowing individuals who were lower on the social hierarchy opportunities for equality through perseverance and mutual service. Cooperation was essential for survival. When survival is not the paramount issue at hand, humans seem to forget that cooperation and collaboration is what got them to the point where they could think about more, that their talents and ambitions could rise to a place to both be noticed and acted upon. Humans start to separate themselves into haves and have-nots, into I am right and you are wrong categories. At the Juneteenth celebration booth I helped with, there was a banner that asked, "How may we be of service?" On the table there were markers and blank cards. People were asked what was on their hearts. And what did they know they needed, but did not know how to solve themselves? What in their life would they really appreciate other humans taking an interest in helping with? There were also coloring pages on the table. Anyone was welcome to color, but it was mostly the children who chose to stop and grab a crayon. One young lady of about 7 came into the booth with her adult after listening to other adults share what cards were for. And she bypassed all the coloring pages and asked if she could write on a card about what she was concerned about. She asked for help spelling and wrote "World Hunger" on the card along with her name. 7 years old, and all she wants is help solving the problem of world hunger. One beautiful mother followed her son into the tent as he grabbed a crayon and a coloring sheet. She looked a little nervous, asking if it was all right that he be there. Of course was the answer, and she was invited to fill out a card of her own. She said she was worried that what was in her heart and what she wanted most really did not matter, that she felt very alone in her concerns. When assured that everyone had a valid concern and that we would really like to know what people most needed, she shared that all she really wanted was places where her autistic son could thrive. As you can see from the pictures, the concerns of people that day were as individual as the people attending. The last one I will speak to specifically was a gentleman who was a neurosurgeon. He was there with his family and talked about how his students would soon not be able to continue because there was never a cap on how much they were allowed to borrow for their education, unless there is education reform so that the cost of education is less. People that aspire to be doctors, to be neurosurgeons, need to have access to loans. He wanted help with allowing his students to continue their studies. The amount of concerns, of topics, of ways in which people need help can be very overwhelming. Where do we even begin? The tent I was at was sponsored by French Creek Indivisible and 50501. Both groups aim to help engaging in our political landscape. At no time during the day did anyone ask people sharing their concerns what label they place on themselves. They simply ask how they may be of service. These two groups are part of a coalition of other groups that keeps expanding in their membership. Erie Network Advocates, Northwest PA Indivisible, Crawford County United, Benedictines for Peace, the State Street Salon, NAACP of Crawford County, Erie Indivisible, Crawford Dems, Erie County United, and now Unity in Edinburgh. Each group has a focus, and they also know that in order to further their core mission of helping people, of establishing a peaceful way of engaging with others, in order to support the broader mission of collaboration and understanding that is necessary to share and work together, they come together. Yes, it is politics. It is also life. It is connecting people with others that will help with their immediate needs. It is understanding that we do not move forward in kindness in a vacuum. It is knowing that the talents of others help the whole. The last part of this slideshow presentation is the reading of the 9th chapter of Jamil Zaki's Hope for Cynics, the Surprising Science of Human Goodness. The chapter shares the history of why the United States takes on the belief that there is so much corruption in the organizations that set to help others. It also gives a real example of what happens when we leave that type of rhetoric aside and move forward and trust that people who have fallen into hard times are not trying to rip off the system. It is understood that behind every stereotype, there are real people, real individuals, real stories. It is not accepting that people are less than, that there are ways to solve issues without othering people and without succumbing to the rhetoric that some deserve fairness while others do not. No matter who you are or what labels you have for yourself, you are human. Humans have the capacity for understanding, for kindness, and for sharing their talents. The groups that are forming a coalition in the Erie and Crawford County areas are moving through established channels, educating, forming protests, sharing when public meetings are happening to get people engaged, and bringing to light the violence and rejection of honored United States standards like habeas corpus. They are filing court cases and moving in peace. These are concepts and choices that outweigh any labels. It's not about parties. It's not about color or race. It's not about rich or poor. It's not about conservative, moderate, or liberal. It's about humanity finding the best in themselves and settling problems and differences from a place of integrity. How do you choose to express your humanity? In solid information or propagandized headlines? In fear or in hope? In violence or in peace? Chapter 9 of Hope for Cynics by Jamil Zaki, Building the World We Want. Millions of Americans lived in destitution while oligarchs flashed unthinkable luxury. Zero-sum self-interest ruled the nation. Politicians pursued increasingly extreme agendas, and cooperation across parties broke down, sinking the nation into gridlock. New media outlets gawked at the nation's moral collapse, broadcasting a parade of scandals. This wasn't the 2020s, it was the 1890s. But just like now, cynicism was alive and well. Almost half of America's wealth was owned by the top 1%, making the nation twice as unequal as it was in 2022. Robber barons like Andrew Carnegie and Leland Stafford monopolized whole industries. They raised the nation's productivities on the backs of poor, mistreated, and child labor, one historian writes. The underclass, packed into fetid slums, hated the modern pharaohs ruling over them. The rich despised the poor right back. The financial speculator, Jay Gould, bragged that he could hire one half of the working class to shoot the other half to death. The elite hadn't gotten there by themselves. Lawmakers helped robber barons acquire their wealth, while social Darwinism helped to justify it. Some people were better at the contest of life than others, one writer claimed. The good ones climbed out of the jungle of savagery and passed their talents on to their offspring, who climbed still higher. Classism rose, and post-Civil War, racial progress reversed. The Supreme Court's decision in Plessy versus Ferguson ushered in Jim Crow policies designed to disenfranchise Black Americans. By 1908, Black voting rates across the South had fallen by over 60% of their peaks. And during the 1890s, a lynching occurred somewhere in the U.S. every 2 days. Meanwhile, the telephone, telegram, and daily newspapers flooded people with new information, but not always the useful sort. William Randolph Hearst pioneers yellow journalism, lurid coverage targeted at audience negative biases. His San Francisco Examiner devoted almost a quarter of its stories to crime, old-fashioned clickbait that exaggerated details to entice readers. People plugged into the vast new networks while older connections withered. Millions of Americans had left stable rural communities for cities full of strangers. Family shops lost business to mall order catalogs. And in 1912, the presidential campaign speech, Woodrow Wilson mourned our losses. All over the Union, people are coming to feel they have no control over the course of their affairs. The everyday relationships of men are largely with great impersonal concerns, with organizations, not with other individual men. Americans living during this time could have easily concluded that the nation was a one-way street leading to social decay. Yet it wasn't. After a chaotic and painful labor, the 20th century gave birth to a vibrant progressive movement. Activists, workers, and civil leaders assembled into a vast array of new organizations. They built power through strikes, lobbying, and public engagement, and racked up staggering accomplishments. Here are just some of the policies passed between 1888 and 1920. Women's suffrage, the income tax, the creation of the Food and Drug Administration, Federal Trade Commission, and the National Forest and Park Systems, child labor laws, the 8-hour workday, campaign finance regulation, and public kindergarten. Alongside material change, people started to think differently. An ideology of Christian social gospel spread, emphasizing moral responsibility to help those in need. This philosophy overtook social Darwinism. An analysis of all published books from the time finds that the term social gospel ascended in use. The phrase survival of the fittest dwindled. So did cynicism. The General Social Survey began 1972, when nearly half of the Americans believed that most people can be trusted. That's where we started this book. But it's not the first time scientists had asked these questions. In 1960, 58% of Americans had trusted their fellow citizens. During World War II, the number was an astonishing 73%. And as the century reached its middle, the nation's mind was turned toward goodness, its heart towards community, and its eyes toward progress. This high water mark of trust sounds like a fantasy today. It would have also sounded like wishful thinking decades before it occurred. After learning about the trust recession, I began to wonder if the opposite had ever occurred. Where and when did people's faith in one another build instead of break? Those stories, I thought, could provide clues as to how we might escape the cynicism trap now. It turns out that positive change happened right here. Before American community disintegrated, it strengthened. Before things got worse, they got much better. And what political scientist Robert Putnam calls the upswing. It's easy to forget these accomplishments because progress has a habit of hiding its tracks. New generations take for granted rights and abilities their ancestors dreamed of. Cynicism takes root in our amnesia. Psychologically, the country is worse off than decades ago. This period of decline dominates our mind, and for good reason. Unless you're past retirement age, your entire life has occurred within it. But zoom out a bit, and the past tells a different story. Fierce, hopeful work changed the world before and can do it again. The rest of this book will imagine what it could look like if we wanted to follow the path of earlier progressives and reduce cynicism on a grand scale. A powerful starting point would be to decrease inequality. But ironically, one barrier that stands in the way of this goal is cynicism itself, and how easily we point to it and at the poorest among us. In 1976, Ronald Reagan began telling a story, one he would repeat during his failed presidential run, then his successful one, then throughout his first term. In Chicago, they found a woman who used 80 names, 30 addresses, 15 telephone numbers to collect food stamps, veterans benefits for 4 non-existent deceased veteran husbands, as well as welfare. Depending on the speech, he might mention her Cadillac and furs, or fake kids she used to swindle the system. Journalists mocked Reagan for exaggerating, but the real story was even worse. Linda Taylor, a woman in his speeches, really did use dozens of aliases to steal hundreds and thousands of dollars in public benefits. She also trafficked children and was credibly accused of murder. Taylor abused many people and was a victim of abuse as well. Her life was a complex tragedy, but in Reagan's hands, it became a cartoon, the welfare queen. According to him, catching one Linda Taylor meant there were countless others around the country buying caviar with food stamps and pumping our children to live off taxpayers' sweat. Reagan used nut picking, critiquing extreme examples, and pretending that they are the norm to convince people that the most corrupt welfare recipient represented all of them. By 1978, just 2 years after Reagan introduced the welfare queen story, 84% of Illinois voters thought welfare fraud was the most pressing issue facing their state. Nationally, fraud investigations jumped by more than 700% between 1970 and 1980. America spent millions of dollars to hunt down cheaters and barely found any. That's because most recipients of public aid are nothing like Linda Taylor. A 2018 report found that for every 10,000 households that participated in the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, only 14 included fraudsters. Welfare queen myths were inaccurate, offensive, and effective. They inspired public support for a 1982 bill that cut $25 billion from social welfare programs, a massive transfer of wealth upward. That year alone, more than 1 million Americans lost access to food stamps. Many cast into hunger. Public benefits in the U.S. continued to decrease steadily over the decades. And between 1993 and 2018, the real value of cash provided by the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program was cut by nearly 80%. Over the same period, the number of American households living in extreme poverty, defined as living on less than $2 per day per person, soared, more than doubling by some estimates. Racist, sexist tropes like welfare queens live on. While white Americans estimate that 37% of U.S. welfare recipients are Black, nearly double the actual figure of 21%. And more public aid white people believe goes to Black recipients, the less they support welfare in general. During the COVID pandemic, the government broadened some welfare programs. This led to an avalanche of criticism anchored in the fear that poor people would take advantage. Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz called public aid recipients couch potatoes. Democratic Senator Joe Manchin worried parents would use child tax credits to buy drugs. Stereotypes like these build a widespread and long-standing suspicion of people who lack resources. Given less, poor people are also trusted less, a psychological inequality that reinforces the economic kind. 200 years before Reagan's time, the Scottish philosopher David Hume laid out his recipe for a society. Every man ought to be supposed a knave, and to have no other end in all his actions than private interest. By this interest, we must govern him, and by means of it, make him cooperate to public good. These suggestions were simple and perfectly cynical. People are selfish, and society can function only if they are browbeaten into pretending not to be. Jack Welch built corporate worlds to suit Homo economics. Hume suggested we build governments for him as well. A nation built on Hume's ideas would start with a constitution for knaves. Rather than guaranteeing liberty, this document would reduce it. East Germany, under the Stasi speed and on, threatened citizens to keep them in line. But even freer nations, some people live under a constitution for knaves, usually those with the fewest rights, opportunities, and resources. In fact, if you want to guess how marginalized someone is, a useful sign is how cynically everyone else treats them. One person who lived that story is William Goodwin. He was born in West Oakland before it was gentrified, he tells me. His father died when he was young. His mother struggled to support him and his siblings. From the age of 6, he washed neighbors' cars and mowed their lawns. When his mother was low on funds, the corner store ran credit line so that the Goodwins could eat. The family was enterprising, faith-driven, and supported by community. We didn't know we were poor, he remembers. When William reached 5th grade, his mother petitioned to get him a better education. He took tests in grammar and geometry and was soon sent to a new school perched in Oakland Hills. By the time he was in high school, he woke up at 5 a.m., took 2 buses, and walked through a parking lot full of other students' gleaming new cars. If he hadn't known he was poor, he did now. Goodwin was out of place at this new school, and out of place when he got home, too. He thinks he's somebody now, friends would say, mocking him, as too good for his old neighborhood. Soon, Goodwin began running the school store and discovered a passion for business. After graduation, he worked in sales at Levi's and then became an underwriting liaison for a major insurance company, climbing the ranks for over a decade. As a student, he had felt like a foreigner in the Oakland Hills. Now he lived there, pleased to support his mother through her last years of life, and later his young daughter through her first. It all came crashing down when Goodwin developed a degenerative nerve condition. A needling sensation took root in his neck and barely ever left. His back spasmed constantly. He had trouble sitting and keeping his neck and head upright. Goodwin wanted to keep working but needed accommodations. In his department, each liaison was responsible for processing 80 insurance claims a day. Rapid-fire work also meant being anchored to a desktop for nearly every minute. Numbers meant everything, and Goodwin simply couldn't make his anymore. A standing desk, longer breaks, and reduced quota could have helped Goodwin stay at the job that he loved. Instead, his company busted him down to the filing room. In a nod to his condition, the demotion did not come with a pay cut. As a result, Goodwin's colleagues murmured that he was faking his symptoms to do easier work. Black and now disabled, Goodwin arrived at the intersection of American stereotypes. People he had known for years ignored his long-standing work ethic and cast suspicion upon him. Goodwin's boss made him visit an army of doctors to verify his condition was real, then tried to force him into a risky surgery that only helps about 50% of patients. When he refused, Goodwin was laid off and began applying for disability. The process lasted better than part of a year and seemed built to demoralize. He would spend half a day waiting for a 10-minute conversation with a benefits counselor and then be told he had to visit a different office, only to be sent back to the first. He pinballed from one doctor's appointment to another, each time answering the same questions. Was he really sick? Did he really want to work at all? The pressure beamed down on me, Goodwin remembers, reinforcing the same old stereotypes, a Black man trying to get one over. Adding insult to literal injury, he felt helpless, alone, and distrusted, even though I was telling the truth. Eventually, the system's doubts filtered into his mind. Am I who they think I am? He wondered one day, staring out of the window on an Oakland train. Will I end up being who they think I am? His benefits application was rejected. He appealed, and then things got really technical. Interrogation-like interviews, appointments, and forms multiplied. He was rejected again and had only so many appeals left. He thought back to the poverty of his childhood. I'm going back there, he thought. I can't believe it. Goodwin considered giving in, but someone was counting on him. I thought about my daughter and how I could be the best father to her. Injury or no injury, I had to put all my focus in her. He appealed again, this time hiring a lawyer who presented the same evidence of disability Goodwin had included in the first two applications. The third was approved for a term of 3 months. Goodwin estimates he spent 75 hours on the process. In the meantime, the court officials and employment doctors got paid, as did the lawyer who took 15% off the top of Goodwin's award. The process started all over again as he applied for long-term disability. Meanwhile, Goodwin's financial life unraveled. His car broke down and he didn't have money to fix it, leaving him unable to seek out work he could do with his condition. He and his daughter moved in with friends. They were, as he puts it, homeless, even though we had somewhere to live. It would be years before he finally received long-term benefits and some stability. For his daughter's sake, Goodwin needed to believe in himself, even when no one else did. What he stopped believing in, though, was the system. He watched his boss look for any excuse to drop a disabled employee, like a landlord trying to evict a tenant. Government programs, he says, aim to keep you where you are, not to pull you out, so the narrative stays alive, as they can stay employed. Having been judged, Goodwin judged right back. According to the U.S. Census, 9 million American children experienced poverty in 2022. Childhood poverty is a moral catastrophe and an economic one. A report from the Center of American Progress estimated that it costs U.S. $500 billion per year because poor children grow into adults who work less and use more health care than others. Poverty hurts Americans at the beginning of life and hurries its end. In 2019, report found that the poorest U.S. citizens die an average of 5 years earlier than the UK's poor, whereas wealthy Americans live just 5 weeks less than their British counterparts. As we've seen, periods of high inequality raise cynicism, but the reverse is also true. Cynicism feeds inequality. At least some studies suggest that a person's faith in fellow citizens predicts whether they will support public aid for the poor. When a nation stops trusting itself, its suspicions first turn toward those with the least. Povertyism, discrimination against the poor, is alive and well in stump speeches and in government processes. And when the poor seek aid in the US, they are sentenced to death by 1,000 paper cuts. A single mother in Louisiana must complete a 26-page application to qualify for food stamps. Journalist Annie Lowry describes some of its highlights. Page 3 lets her know that she needs to collect paperwork or data in up to 13 different categories: pharmacy printouts for the past 3 months, 4 pay stubs, baptismal certificates, proof of who lives at home. Page 7 outlines the penalties if she misuses her benefits by, for example, spending them on a cruise ship or at a psychic. Page 15 asks her to detail her income from 24 different sources. To access food stamps and health care, poor Americans must wait hours to answer demeaning questions that have nothing to do with their request. On what date was your child conceived? These rituals tax the time of poor Americans and their minds. Some research finds that scarcity, the feeling of struggling to make ends meet, decreases human mental capacity as much as pulling an all-nighter. Except, unlike all-nighters, scarcity follows us for weeks, months, and years. William Goodwin needed the skills and the knowledge he gained in the insurance industry to fight for his benefits. Not everyone has those advantages, and many don't receive the benefits that they are owed. In Poverty by America, sociologist Matthew Desmond reports that each year poor Americans pass up over $13 billion in food stamps, $17 billion in tax credits, $38 billion in supplemental security income, and $62 billion in government health insurance. Many manage to receive benefits only when they hire lawyers, like Goodwin did, collectively paying some of their aid back into the system. This is not a sign of policy failing. It's a sign of one working to keep the poor where they are. Rather than admit to this, legislators claim their picky rules are essential to stopping cheaters. Benefits applications are written for the world's Linda Taylors, as rare as they may be. Health care reimbursement forms are written for people who are faking. Our government invests countless hours and dollars to sniff out tiny percent of cheaters. This makes awful economic sense, but provides a cynical cover for mistreating the poor. Our system lobs preemptive strikes at anyone who needs help, and the poor reciprocate that contempt. Trust has plummeted across the U.S., but when inequality rises, faith in people and institutions fall, most quickly among lower income citizens. The poor live under the Constitution for knaves. Well-off Americans live in a far distant nation. Its founding documents assume the best of them. And its coffers open for them through an array of public benefits. My wife and I can contribute to a 529 college account for our daughters. Earning on this investment are not taxed, meaning we keep more of our income than we would without the 529 program. In other words, we receive thousands of dollars in public aid each year. To benefit from this, I don't have to march my children to a government office, wait hours to be seen, or endure questions about what my hair and skin are darker than theirs. People who hold mortgages can write off the interest they pay against their taxes, again, subsidized by the government. In 2020, those tax breaks dwarfed all spending on housing assistance for the poor by a ratio of nearly 4 to 1. If you own a home, you receive much more public aid than if you need one. In 2010 study, 64% of parents who put money in 529 accounts wrongly reported that they had not used a government social program. The government gives this money away so easily that 2 of every 3 people who receive it don't even notice. Wealthy Americans live in a welfare state invisible to nearly everyone, including themselves. The American poor learn quickly and often that our nation sees them as shiftless cheats. Those with means learn the opposite, plied with benefits and the benefit of doubt. In the most rarefied air, billionaires pay a lower percentage of their income in taxes than any other income bracket. They also earn outside influence empowered through the passage of Citizens United to funnel massive amounts of money into political campaigns. In the world's richest nation, millions of people drink water that fails to meet federal health standards. The American Journal of Public Health estimates that between 35,000 and 45,000 Americans die from curable illnesses each year because they lack health insurance. Medical and other debt also significantly increase the chance people will attempt suicide. Meanwhile, the U.S. dominates the world market for its super yachts, accounting for about a quarter of all global sales. It's hard to stomach being the villains of a slow-motion moral catastrophe. There are at least two ways we can respond to this dissonance. The first is to shut ourselves off, trying not to think about people who have less than we do. If we do think about them, we can turn our cynicism to justify why they must suffer. Social Darwinists claim that the rich are better competitors than anyone else. And even older prejudice claims the rich are just plain better. Aristotle believed aristocrats were society's frontal lobes, guided by principle, conscience, and forbearance. The wretched masses were greedy homo economicus, who must be saved from themselves. Slaves were better off in chains, for they would squander freedom. We receive this prejudice every time we suspect the poor will run off with public aid. This all contributes to a system of cynicism for the many and the faith of the few, a philosophy Diogenes would despise, and the data contradict, but that provides psychological armor for an unjust world. There's a second way we could respond to the crisis of inequality, one that is more compassionate and data-driven. This alternative path promises civic strength and moral health, but also requires painful inner work for those of us with privilege. To pursue it, we would need to grapple with the ways we benefit from the immersiveness of our neighbors and how we could contribute to a more just system. That change is probably more popular than you think. Common Ground, the survey that identified issues on which Americans agree, found that more than 80%, including 2/3 of Republicans, support the expansion of food stamp programs in at least some cases. Over 70%, including more than half of Republicans, support expanding pre-kindergarten for poor children. Most people want social systems to support those in need. What would that look like? One starting point would be to write policy as if most citizens are who we hope they are, and not the cheats that we have been taught to fear. It would mean ripping up the Constitution for names and giving everyone, rich, poor, and middle class, a chance to prove themselves. In 2016, William Goodwin received such a chance. A friend told him about Up Together, a national organization that provides aid to poor Americans, where public programs confuse and humiliate. Up Together is built to empower. Its members set their own financial goals, and the organization gives them money and other resources to pursue them. This approach is often called direct cash transfers. No 26-page forms, no micromanaging red tape, suspicion replaced with simple, loud trust. At first, Goodwin didn't trust back. You hear about a program giving out resources. It sounds like a scam. I kept the money in a bank for a minute, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Lots of members start out that way, doubting anyone who doesn't doubt them. Up Together CEO, Jesus Durena, sees pain under their distrust. After all that neglect, people think, no way am I worthy of this recognition, let alone investment. Garina remembers giving a laptop to one Up Together member who asked where to sign it out. Sure, he'd need to bring it back, in disbelief that it was really his. Just don't call us if it breaks, Garina joked. With Up Together's help, Goodwin set goals to pay off his car loan and start planning his daughter's education, sending his daughter on a university tour. After that trip, she was different, he remembers. Higher education became more than an idea. It was real to her, and that made it real to me. Goodwin now serves on the board of multiple nonprofit organizations and works in partnership with his county to advocate for housing equity. His daughter attends college just east of the Bay Area. He loves having her close by, even if he wishes she'd visit more often. Goodwin's changed their story, and then William became more ambitious about helping others. At first, it was like, we've got this money, how do we spend it? But then I thought, how do I give back? He joined a group of Up Together members to revamp a computer room at a local community center and founded a literacy program at the East Oakland Library that is still running 5 years later. I can't seem to stop, Goodwin tells me. There's a responsibility on me as someone receiving cash transfers to make good on them. As we've seen, leaps of faith inspire people to step up and earn our trust. Given a chance, Up Together members rise. Within 2 years of joining, the average Up Together family reports an increase of more than 25% in their income and a 38% decrease in their dependence on government assistance. Over 80% of children in Up Together families receive good or improving grades in that same period. Up Together might seem like a local feel-good story, nice for Goodwin, impossible to spread. But cash transfers are an old and popular idea. Plenty of liberals support them. But so did arch-conservative economist Milton Friedman, who called them a negative income tax, as he argued in 1962. A negative income tax is a proposal to help poor people by giving them money, which is what they need, rather than now by requiring them to come before government officials to rally all their assets and liabilities and to be told that you need to spend X dollars on rent and Y dollars on food. To liberals, cash transfers support justice. To Friedman, they strengthen the free market. When people who are so far apart agree, the rest of us might want to pay attention. And the more scientists examine cash transfers, the wiser they appear. An explosion of new programs has delivered transfers to poor people, first at the global south, but increasing in Europe and in North America as well. Researchers have followed, marking the effects of these programs over time. The results undermine our popular, cynical stories. When the poor receive cash, they don't fritter it away. In nearly 20 studies across Asia, Africa, and Latin America, scientists found no evidence that people use transfers on temptation goods, such as alcohol and tobacco. In 2018, the Charity Foundation for Social Change gave no strings attached transfer of $7,500 to each of 50 unhoused individuals living in Vancouver. People who received this windfall spent no more on temptation goods than those who had not received it. Instead, they used their funds to pay for food, clothes, and rent. Recipients were more likely to find stable housing and less likely to use public services. A 2023 study of the program calculated that each cash transfer saved the shelter system $8,277. In other words, trusting Vancouver's poorest residents was not just moral, it was economical. Across the world, people tend to spend cash transfers wisely. In agricultural societies, families invest in livestock and tools and earn more from farming 2 years later. But don't transfers encourage people to stop working? Like other stereotypes about the poor, this one breaks to pieces with the data. Studies in South Africa, Canada, and the US found no major reductions in labor among people receiving cash transfers. There's one exception. When families receive money, parents spend more time with their kids, creating virtuous cycles that spread across generations. When adults receive cash transfers, their children are more likely to enroll in school and aspire to college, like William Goodwin's daughter. As adults, they earn more than children whose parents received no transfers. These benefits go under the skin as well. Low-income children are more prone to mental illness, but are protected if they live in states that offer larger cash benefits. And when a new program gave money to poor mothers in Pennsylvania, their infants' brains developed more rapidly, possibly because moms were able to create a richer environment for them. If you're surprised by these studies, that's unsurprising. The researchers who gave cash transfers to unhoused Vancouverians also asked more than 1,000 Canadians what would happen to the money. Most predicted it would go toward drugs. I don't think the people who made these guesses hated unhoused individuals. If in the past you thought poor people would waste cash transfers, I don't imagine you are full of hate either, in part because I shared these stereotypes. Before reading the research on cash transfers, I would have worried that the recipients might waste the funds or work less after receiving them. I'm not proud of my past prejudice, but I realize it's another common side effect of our culture's cynicism. We should arm ourselves with more skepticism and turn it inward as well. Where do our assumptions come from? What purpose do they serve? Who else do they benefit? Cynical beliefs uphold the status quo. If poor are knaves, the wealthy have no reason to question their advantage. Programs like Up Together and Foundations for Social Change upend these views. Their hopeful experiments show us what happens when society instead takes a leap of faith on poor people. Earlier this decade, we did. During the pandemic, the U.S. government sent direct cash transfers, rent and childcare assistance, and other public support at a level unseen in decades. In the face of a generational disaster, poverty in America decreased. This was a massive victory for the poor and for national decency toward all citizens. It could have been celebrated by solutions journalism heralded as a sign of what could be. Instead, the moment ended, public support receded, and extreme needs skyrocketed again. To do better, we can change our narratives about the poor, using media and education for asset framing instead of cynicism. As those stories rise, so might compassionate, creative policies to lift people up. Redistributing trust also means considering who receives it too easily. Matthew Desmond argues that nearly all extreme poverty in the U.S. could be canceled with about $177 billion per year. The top 1% of wealthy Americans evade $175 billion per year in taxes. In other words, an enormous amount of suffering could be offset not by increasing top tax rates to what they were in higher trust times like the 1950s or the 1970s where they were 70%, but by just getting our richest citizens to pay what they owe. If we ask fewer questions of poor people, we might ask more questions of the rich. For instance, keeping a closer eye on their tax payments to constrain cheating, preventing dark money from flooding into politics, and forcing disclosures of super PAC donors could invite public scrutiny of their tactics. Of course, cash alone will not bring about social progress many of us want. A tapestry of injustice and oppression covers vulnerable people. Changemakers around the world now are fighting these forces, wielding hope as one of their most effective tools. Like the 20th century progressives before them, they are breaking down doors. Like people back then, we might be surprised by all they can accomplish.